All right, we're talking about React component hierarchies. One of the things that I see students struggle with in hierarchies the most is knowing where to put state. And so your cheat sheet, if I've got a collection of components here, these components don't know anything about each other. That's not how components work. They're at the same level. You don't know your brothers and sisters. You don't know whether or not they're there. You don't know what state they have. You don't know shit. So anything that would require knowledge of more than one component needs to be at somewhere higher up in the hierarchy. So that means maybe there's a component outside of all of this. That would be something like, which one of these three is active? How are they sorted? Which ones are being displayed right now? All of those require some knowledge of more than one thing, which means they're wrapped by something. That's one of the trickiest things, I think, to understand about components when you're starting out. Ask me some questions about that idea.
So with state, I've heard this mixed. Half the people say, and this is what kind of messed me up at the beginning of Mod 4, like first Mod 4, was the top component needs to hold all the state, assuming it's a class component or class-based component setup. What about like if one component branch, I guess, needs state, but the rest of it doesn't? Is it okay to put state there?
Yeah.
And just let that go down? Okay.
Yeah, all the state doesn't have to go in the very top. So two different ideas about this, and this might be where you got it from. So yeah, let's say that this is the app and it's got these two big containers in it and they have things in it. Maybe it's got something. All right, so we've got some hierarchy happening here. If there's some state that's relevant to all of this, but not any of this, yeah, put the state in that component. Doesn't need to go in the very top. Now, here's a different way to think of this. Distinguishing between views and components. I should note that this idea of splitting out a view from a component, purely semantic. It exists in your head. There's only one kind of component in React or Vue or Ember or any of them. But we can think of them in two very different ways. So a view can be routed to. And usually what I'll use a view for is all, let's see, I want to be careful how I word this. All savable state. So if I were to reload this page, what should stay exactly the same? That's stuff that should be in a view. Components, so like all network stuff goes here, fetch requests and what have you. No network requests. You can have like temporary state. So like whether or not a drop down or whether or not an accordion is open or not. Whatever, you refresh the page and it goes back to some initial state. Who gives a shit? So we'll call that like temporary state. They're often reusable. Not always, but often.
Like forms?
Yeah, form component. Whereas these like are like always single use. So if it would have a URL attached to it, that's a view. And then what I'll use inside of that, any like state management stuff, any network requests, any of that kind of shit, that goes there, and then pretty much nothing else. What it might do is render a entire component hierarchy under it that doesn't have any of that complicated state stuff, doesn't have any of the complicated network stuff, all that shit's out of it. Because when a component is dumb, meaning that it doesn't have state and it doesn't do network requests, when a component is dumb, it's a lot easier to work with. And so we can split out the smart parts and the dumb parts into two different places. And that generally makes an app a lot easier to work with. And so in that sense, like your views might manage quite a bit of state, whereas your components, not necessarily no state. Like I said, is the accordion open or not? Anything that like you're okay with just dying as soon as you refresh the app. It can have that kind of state, but that ends up being not that much.
So I guess kind of in the thought of how I handle state in my apps, I would have class components in Vue that would be with a router that would take me to different pages like user login and stuff. And components, if it does have state, would be what I use hooks for of like toggleable state.
Mm-hmm. You
Okay.
can do that. Yeah, like those two kinds of state are identical. It's just different syntaxes for it. But like, here, I'll give you some examples.
Yeah, I actually don't know how to do a fetch with hooks yet. I've only used it as toggles.
You do the fetches with in the use effect hook. And then
Oh,
you
okay.
use your state hooks inside of that. That's it. It's way easier than the class one. Let's look at the, hey, what's up, Katie?
Hey.
If I look at the Firebase site, which is Vue, but it's the same idea.
How different are those two, Vue and React? I know a lot of people who start React and go to Vue like it more, but
they're not super different. So here's a great example. We just did this last week. This is a view. If you go to the /videos URL or click on the videos link on the Firebase site, this is what you go to. So whenever it gets mounted, it does this fetch. These are interacting with like the Vue equivalent of Redux, so they're state. Those are state things. These are all like state interactions here also. These would be like your functions that you would pass into things. All right. But other than that, it doesn't do anything. It's just a little container for all of that. And then we have this video search component that does the actual layout of the app. And it also has some state. For example, what things have you typed in? What videos are currently showing up? That doesn't need to save on a refresh. Who gives a shit? Like, so it's that kind of state. Everything else is passed into it as props. There's no other state management stuff in this. It's just logic. Those things are just like, these don't exist in React and should. It's my single biggest gripe with React is that you can't emit events out of components. That's all that's happening there. So much easier.
wait, can you elaborate on emit?
Yeah, so in React, if I have a custom component like this, I can't listen to an event on it. There's no on click or on anything. you only can do the like built-in DOM events, and they have to come from HTML elements. So you could do an on-click. This is the equivalent of that with a button in React, but you couldn't do an on-click with a custom component, and you certainly couldn't make up your own events. You can in Vue and Ember and Angular. So you do it like this. You go, I would like to fire off a delete video event. And then something else can listen for that event. That would be like on delete video, call this method.
That's pretty cool.
It is cool. So you don't have to pass functions into things like you do in React. You can pass functions in with this. You can do it. We call those closure actions in the SPA world. You can do them in this and all the frameworks at this point, but it's mostly like to make React people feel comfortable. I think it's a lot easier to think of them more like the DOM, where like the element emits, or the DOM element emits an event which you can listen to and attach a behavior to. Much easier. Katie and Tiffany, we're just kind of goofing around. So are there any specific questions that y'all have with component hierarchies?
I can't think of a question to ask right now that doesn't pertain to the code challenge.
Give me an example of something you're struggling with in the code challenge, and let's see if we can find the principle behind it.
I think I just got tripped up with like one of the lowest child component being written differently.
Okay.
And then I've been deconstructing my props when I've passed the range of functions. And so I think I just got tripped up on going back to props again, knowing how to call, like pass down information through that way too.
So while you're getting comfortable with that kind of stuff, don't change, like in the code challenge, don't change the class components to function components or vice versa. But like to understand what's happening, that's completely legit. So let's say I do a create React app, new boot goofing. What? No longer support global X. What the fuck? All right.
Wait, does that mean you have to do NPX now? Have to?
I guess I got to NPX it. New boot goofing.
That's going to take getting used to.
This is why I didn't want to do this in the first place. Stupid. All right. All right. So I'm going to call this app, I guess. Dumb.
Is that just a Vim thing? Because I'm doing it on, or
No,
no.
it's a latest version thing.
Oh. I don't want the latest version then.
All right, cool. So I'm in. So that's on 3000, and there we are. So some good practice is if you go into, like, for example, the app, change what it's called to source. Oh, I'm in something totally different. That's there. And this is to go back and forth between class components and function components. So if I want to turn this into a class component, walk me through it. What's step one?
First, you'll import the React component at the top. I don't know if your new version needs that or not.
Okay.
And then you'll change function app to class app extends component. And then you'll wrap your render or your return in a render.
That's it. That's all we got to do. Two different syntaxes for one thing. Same thing with props. Let's say we go all the way back. Let's say this had props. So it's going to have prop 1, prop 2, prop 3. So we could do something like prop 1 or props 1 like that. We could also do the destructuring thing and pull out 1. Exact same thing.
That's not the part that tripped me up, though. I think it was specifically when you're passing down a function and it takes an argument.
Yep.
And how do I talk around it? Would you also destructure your argument as well inside?
Nope.
Okay.
Because it doesn't know. It doesn't care. It's just the function. So you might do it something like this. All right, so we have this click handler here. And so we make a function called click handler. If we need it, we have the event right there. And I have some function in scope. Just call it.
Yeah.
The trap that I think a lot of people fall into is trying to do that directly inside of this. Like that. So the problem is, yeah, what if you got to pass it some arguments? What if you have to pass it IDs or something like that? So then you end up going like this dot I, or no, this on it, I guess. You do something like that, and it goes, on click is expecting a function. Oh no. And it is. It's looking for a function handler. What is some function with invoked with ID passed into it? What's that going to evaluate to?
The value of that function with that parameter.
The return value. So unless that return value is a function, we're fucked. Now you could hack around that, which a lot of React devs do. Give it an anonymous function that just calls that function or does whatever you want. That works. I don't like this. And the reason I don't like it is, in general, try to keep as much logic like out of your actual templates. So instead, we do something like Oops, nope. Thick handler. And now we can call some function with ID. All right, where does ID come from? I don't know. Did it get passed in? You can destructure that out too. Is it not destructured? Is it just props? When it's props.some function and props.id.
I see. That makes a lot more sense to me now.
Good. I'm glad. And like if that thing we're attaching the thing to is a form or something, you might need to event.prevent default, just like we do in regular JavaScript. Might be the case that we don't need the event at all. It's the case with a lot of clicks. Otherwise, fine. All right, what else y'all want to know?
So I was trying to, I've been working on that Google search page.
Yep.
And I think I kind of got tripped up with the top, knowing if I needed to group like that, your photo and like the menu together in one component, or if I should separate them and just like have them next to each other.
Ooh. Let's take a look at it. So this like top bar from Google to the picture of me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so all of that is probably going to be a component. Like let's take a look at it. So within the bigger app, I'd probably make all of that one component. One reason I would do that is like this is a fucking slam dunk for Flexbox space between. In the space between our wicked lies. Because I got one group of things and another group of things. And if I want to push them out to the sides, put them in a container and tell the container to flex its children off to the sides. So I end up with that component and that component. And then this blue guy goes, hey, my two children, space between them.
Okay, so this would kind of look like left side nav, right side nav.
Yeah, something kind of like that.
Like that. Okay.
And inside of this, that's going to have the Google logo and the search bar. And then this one's going to have this thing and that thing. And all those boxes, I'd make components out of all those. And specifically, I think I called those different things too. Okay, so I have this header. Headers also has like the links under it. Primary navigation is the blue thing. Oh, I didn't group those. Weird. How'd I do this then? Now I'm kind of curious. So, and yeah, then I called this green box here user navigation. Well, I'm sort of curious now. So this is inside of primary navigation. We're talking about the logo and the search input. So, oops. App.css. Primary navigation. Oh, I gridded it. There you go. That's another way to do it.
Oh.
Is I put this on a grid. I made these columns for it. So this is, it's a fixed width for the logo. It's a fixed width for the search bar. And then one FR is everything else. And then within the primary navigation, search input. User navigation just takes up the entire thing. And it justifies to the end of it. So this is happening in that one FR. And so I flexed that. This actually ends up, instead of being like this, what I did was this is taking up all of this. And I said, hey, green box, flex your children all the way to the end.
Okay, and because it was in a row, it knew to push.
Right.
Side.
And since these things are in a grid, then I didn't need this other container, this other green one.
Awesome. Thank you. I have to go to my code challenge review now,
Cool.
But that helped a lot.
Do it up. I'm glad.
Thank you.
Other questions? What's on your mind? Here's another thing I see people struggle with in React, just component frameworks in general, is putting stuff in state that's not actually state. It's derived state or static state. Let's talk about some different kinds of state. State can be dynamic, could be static, it could be derived. So dynamic state is stuff that changes. What is the state of the traffic light right now? Red, yellow, or green? It could be static state. This is like variables and stuff that doesn't change ever. That stuff doesn't need to go in your state anything. You can do a couple different things with it. But like, let's say that whatever.jpg. Say bring in that class app extends component, and then I wrap that in a render. Going back and forth between class components, function components should be second nature to you. Just get fast at it. And this isn't a const anymore. doesn't have a props. This dot props. This would be this dot click handler. All right, so let's say that whatever.jpg, let's say that's a variable, but it never changes. The wrong thing to do is this. And then make this this dot state dot image URL. Sloppy, stop doing that. Instead, if it's in a variable, you can just put it in this render method. We can move this thing over here. Do it that way. Just a variable. You can put variables wherever you want. That's static state. Not really state at all. Variables. Derived state, so now what trips people up, is state that's derived from some other dynamic state. But it's not state itself. The classic example of this is first name, last name. Full name is not state. Do this a couple different ways. We could do full name is this dot state dot first name and this dot state dot last name. Cool, and then we can use full name anywhere we want. That's one way to do it. And it'll work, for the record. Other way you could do it is you could make it, put it in a function. Call it get full name. And then anywhere you want to use it, it would be this dot get full name, like that. Both of those depend on other state. What they're called, other SBA frameworks call those computed properties. But those are not state themselves, they're just derived from somebody else's state. Other questions about React and such? Cool. Good hunting.
Thanks.